Claude Lederberger knows this place like the back of his hand. Here you get an unobstructed view of the Fessenheim reactor in Alsace. It's the oldest French power station in service, and since the crisis in Japan, it's back in the spotlight. For this long-time anti-nuclear activist, there's not a shadow of a doubt, it should be shut down.
Plusieurs choses sont à mettre en avant.
There are many aspects to this. There is the risk of an earthquake here,
Le risque d'inondation,
a risk of flooding. The plant is in bad shape, and crucially, as you can see here, the basins which cool the spent fuel are located outside the containment area.
le usé, à l'extérieur de l'enceinte de confinement.
For Claude, the similarities to Fukushima are troubling. There's even a risk of a tidal wave here, should the High Rhine Canal burst its banks. His concerns are shared by local MPs in neighbouring countries who are demanding a moratorium on this reactor run by the EDF. But people here have been living alongside it for 30 years, and the small community of Fessenheim refuses to panic. 70% of them work on the site. The element of risk is ingrained in their outlook.
We think the plant will more than certainly hold out for another few years. It's maintained regularly.
There are risks, but I think the state, the government, is doing what's necessary.
There are 4 times the number of incidents registered here at France's oldest nuclear plant than at other French reactors. On the other side of the Rhine, in the German state of Baden-Württemberg, the Greens have just won the regional elections. Here, the fear is palpable. A study by Germany's Institute for Ecology says that should there be a serious catastrophe, the evacuation zone could stretch 370 kilometres across France or into Germany, depending on the wind. As the crow flies, the small community of Mülheim is located 10 kilometres from Fessenheim.
We're very worried about it, and for good reason. We're very close to this power station, and if you compare it to what happened in Chernobyl, it's just a stone's throw from here. If something really does happen there and it starts leaking radioactivity, and the wind is going in the right direction, we'll definitely be affected.
The Greens are calling for a broad wave of protests at the border against the reactor. Since Fukushima, more and more people in the region are speaking out. And even if the anti-nuclear movement in Germany has a much longer tradition, seeds of doubt are being sown in France, as shown by recent polls. It's a welcome development across the border in Germany.
What we are now counting on is that the French socialists are making changes to their policy. That the Franche-Comté is the first French province to call for Fessenheim to be shut down. We are seeing promising developments in France.
But for now, the French government refuses to take any hasty decisions about the future of Fessenheim. A security audit for France's nuclear plants is planned for the end of the year.
Well, earlier this week, the council in Strasbourg passed a motion calling for Fessenheim to be shut down because of its age. The move has no legal basis, but marks the first time a local council has so strongly opposed a nuclear facility. Let's get some analysis of the controversy now from our Berlin correspondent, Jessica Saltz. Jessica, thank you for joining us here on Focus. Now, in France, surveys show that the population is in favour of a long-term exit from nuclear power. But in Germany, over 70% of citizens want to see an immediate closure of national nuclear plants. Why the mistrust?
Well, Germany was never itself a nuclear power, but lived with the fear of atomic warfare during the Cold War. So pacifist and ecological movements therefore had influence early on in Germany, and protests here against the civilian use of nuclear power date back to the 1970s. And generations here still, of course, remember the devastation caused by the explosion at the Chernobyl plant in 1986, which had residual effects in parts of Germany too. As well as that, there's also been massive development of renewable energies here in Germany, and citizens in many areas are given the opportunity to invest in local renewable energy products such as solar panels or wind turbines. So the possibility to switch to renewable energies is much more realistic at the moment in Germany than on the other side of the Rhine. But also in France, decisions about nuclear power are made by a centralised government in Paris, while the nuclear reactors are spread out across the country. But in Germany, nuclear power became a very contentious issue of local politics in the federal states that contain nuclear reactors. One of the reasons the Green Party enjoyed such a historic victory in the state in Baden-Württemberg recently was because they've been campaigning to shut down local reactors, including one of the oldest in the country, which of course became a much more significant issue after the events in Japan.
Now, Jessica, French President Nicolas Sarkozy says it's totally out of the question for France to stop using nuclear power, but Germany decided to close its 7 oldest reactors for a 3-month safety review. What are the German government's plans for nuclear power now?
Well, according to a document published on Monday by the Ministry of the Environment, the government here is working on a 6-point plan to reform energy policy. More specifically, the document suggests reverting to the original decision made by the SPD and Green government in 2000 to start decommissioning Germany's nuclear plants by 2020 to 2022. Now, late last year, Angela Merkel, of course, extended the lifespan of Germany's nuclear reactors by an average of 12 years, but then did a U-turn on her nuclear power policy after the events in Fukushima and now wants to focus on a switch to renewables. However, of course, this would require massive investments in order to achieve this. Let's remember that, of course, nuclear power contributes over 25% of energy in Germany. In France, it's significantly more, 80%. But still, compensating for this 25% with renewable energies will be no mean feat. So since Germany recently closed down its 7 oldest reactors, the energy providers have been forced to actually import electrical power from France, which is generated in some part by nuclear power.
And the French nuclear watchdog is currently looking into whether to let Fessenheim run for another decade. Many thanks for your